non-commercial exchange of messages, wireless experimentation, self-training, private recreation, radio sport contesting, and emergency communications. Utilizing electronics, this communication can be used to talk across town, across the world, or even into space, they tell me. All without the internet or phone. This can be a lifeline during times of need. The first speaker tonight is my husband, Neil Levanchi, who got interested in amateur radio when he was a child and observed his father and uncle regularly communicating in this way. He pursued this unique communication approach through the years, and recently our son caught the vision and as an adult has taken up this skill also. I'll let Neil introduce the other speakers as he progresses through the presentation, but I do know that Ernie Childs and Barry Doyle are waiting in the wings. We are excited to hear an overview from you three about this huge topic. Thank you for this presentation tonight. There's a lot of excitement, and I've already heard people who have questions. As we begin, please welcome Neil as our first speaker.
Could everyone please silence their cell phones? Go ahead and take your cell phones out now, your watches, and go ahead and get those silenced. Thank you.
Can I use my beautiful wife as assistant for a second?
Absolutely. Vanna, come on up.
Is this still working? Oh,
It is. You're on. Hot mic, hot mic.
I'll try to watch what I say. Isn't she beautiful? Would you mind holding that right there,
Yes.
Rita? Please bear with me. Welcome to SEMO Amateur Radio Club meeting. This is the first time I've heard put one on. So we have two very good speakers that are going to come this evening and talk on different topics. I would like to start off. What I wanted to do was give you a little history about amateur radio to start with and how I became interested in it. Really, it goes back in the early 1800s, and I hope I don't bore you all. But there was a guy by the name of Volta, and he was from Italy. And he was a physicist and a scientist, and he has been given credit for producing the first battery ever made, as far as we know. Then around that same time, there was a gentleman by the name of James Maxwell. And he was from Scotland, and he was a physicist also. And there have been studies and scientists over the years looking into how light works and bends. And so he came up with a theory that light is an electromagnetic wave. And so he started doing some studies and calculations, but a man came along by the name of Heinrich Hertz from Germany. And he took Maxwell's theories and took it in the laboratory and started analyzing and looking at light, and he started building some apparatuses, and he found out that light is a light wave or goes in cycles, and there's other radio or waves that are involved with the electromagnetic spectrum. And he was able in the laboratory to measure these, and he called them cycles. And what happened was he came up with the idea that these were called Hertzian waves. They're now called radio waves. And he was able to figure out the frequency of how they work. Well, that was all in the early 1800s. Now, here in the United States, there was a man by the name of Samuel Morse, Alfred Vail, and Joseph Henry. Some of the radio operators will know about that name. But anyway, they were playing around with electricity, and there was a lot of science going along, and they decided to look to see if they could transmit a radio signal over wires. And so they got together, and Vail was actually an engineer, and Joseph Henry was actually studying electronic coils and magnetism. So they were the ones who put together what was known as the Morse key. Now, when we think of a Morse code key and telegraph system, it's totally different from what we saw in the movies where they had a little telegraph key. Their telegraph key consisted of a roll of paper, and when they applied electric to it and they had this little stylet, you would put a dot or a line on the paper as the paper rolled out. So they figure out, hey, we could send messages this way. We just got to learn how to figure out how to put the dots and the dashes into an alphabet system. So Vail and Mars came together and they thought, let's try to add dots and dashes to the alphabet system. So they looked at it and they said, what are the most common letters that are used in the English language? Well, they came up, well, E is used a lot, so they gave it a dot. And then they said, well, I is used a lot, so they gave it 2 dots, and went on from there. S was 3 dots, and then they started using the dashes. Well, T is used a lot, so we'll give it a 1 dash, and O is 3 dashes, and M would be 2 dashes. So they came together and put together the Morse code formula. But it had a problem. It took time as the apparatus worked. It would print dots and dashes on this piece of paper that would roll out. And then they had to interpret what they actually sent, and that all took time. Well, Vail, who was an engineer, came along and he worked with them. He says, we got to figure out a faster way of being able to do this, because it takes a long time to send a message by paper and then reading it off. So he came up and invented the telegraph sounder, and what it was a buzzer that would go off as he sent. So there would be a sharp buzz and a long buzz, kind of like what I did here. And that's when the telegraph key came about. Now, one thing that really caused communications to take off in the United States happened in 1848. Does anybody know what happened in 1848? There was a man by the name of James Marshall. He was walking along in a place called Sutter's Mill, California. And he looked down in the stream and he found this real shiny pebble, and he picked it up, and it was gold. And what happened was the discovery of gold occurred in California. There was over 300,000 prospectors immediately headed for California over ground or by sea. Within 2 years' time, California became a state. So we had a state way out on the West Coast, and then we had our other states from the Mississippi over. And so the problem was communications. If you traveled by boat and you sent a letter, it would take months to go around South America up to the California coast. So a guy came up with the idea in 1860, well, why don't we run the mail across the continent? And he developed the Pony Express, and that happened in 1860, and it only lasted 18 months. During that time, in 1861, a corporation decided, hey, I think we can make some money with this, and they looked at Mars's code key, and the federal government was investing a little money because they thought, well, maybe we could really use this. So in 1861, Western Union built the first telegraph line that went all the way across the country. And what took the Pony Express 10 days by leaving in Missouri to Sacramento, California, was shortened down to a few minutes. Well, what happened was, as the telegraph industry grew, what happened in 1861, we went into war. It was the Civil War. So the telegraph system was used extensively during that time of war, 1861 and 1865. Then after the war ended, and we started utilizing the telegraph system across the United States, they thought, hey, what about finding a way to contact quickly Europe? So a bunch of scientists coming together and engineers, and they laid the first transatlantic cable in 1866. And they were able to start sending messages very quickly back and forth from the United States to Europe.
Yeah.
Yes?
Can you hold your
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that better? I'm sorry. Have you all heard me, or do you want me to start over? Anyway, on the other side of the lake, as the British would put it, there was a lot of scientific work going on, and there was a Italian who was homeschooled, and his parents happened to be fairly affluent and wealthy people, and his name was Marconi. And Marconi then started to take the information from Mars and Henry and Maxwell, and he was really interested in science and engineering. And Hertz, who I mentioned a little while ago, who was figured out the cycles of electromagnetic spectrum, had built some equipment and was starting to be able to send like little radio signals, and he was measuring this, and he had a real crude type of receiver. So Marconi took that material, and he asked his dad if it would be all right to invest a little money in this, because he was really interested in engineering and electromagnetic spectrum. So he started working, and he developed a little apparatus that when he pushed down on the button, he could ring a bell in another room within the house. That had been developed by, I believe it was Henry, who was dealing with coils and magnetism. Anyway, he said, well, if it works in the house, how about if I take it out in the yard? So he took it out in the yard, and he started trying. He could ring the bell and whatnot. So then he came across a Frenchman who in 1890 had developed a real crude type of receiver. It was a mechanical a mechanical receiver that when he put electricity to it, it could move objects. So he took that and he attached it to Marconi's tape telegraph system, and he was able to start transmitting signals to this crude receiver that would make dots and dashes on Mars's telegraph system that unrolled paper. So he started building more powerful transmitters and setting them out further. So he was up to 2 miles, and he says, you know, I got something here that may be very interesting to the Italian government. So he took to the Italian government, and they were not interested in it at all. And some other people told him, who were working with him, said, you know, you've really made an interesting invention here. You ought to take it to England and talk to them about getting it patented. So Marconi, in 1896, he was escorted to England by his mother because Marconi was only 21 years old. So he went in, and he had all this gear boxed up, and when he went into customs saw this stuff, and they got a little bit concerned, so they notified other authorities within the British government, and the British government, when he told them what he was doing and applying for the patent, found it to be very interesting, and they thought, you know, maybe we can use that here in Britain. So in 1899, the British Light Service decided to use Marconi's radios to communicate between lighthouses. Well, Marconi said, and started experimenting, how far would it transmit over water? So an investor lent him his sailboat or ship, cruiser, yacht, whatever, and he set up this Marconi radio transmitter receiver, and they started testing it out on the water further and further. And then the British said, hey, we could use this to communicate with our ships. So they started loading all these Marconis, because he had a patent, started making these radios and installing them in British ships. Well, in 1901, Marconi remembered that Benjamin Franklin had flown a kite way up in the air. I'm just teasing about that. But it was the idea was, what he did was he hooked a little wire onto a kite and flew it up 500 feet in the air in 1901, and he was able to send a radio signal 2,200 miles away. And what's interesting about this, at this time they thought only radio waves followed in a straight line or along the curvature of the earth, which is true. Radio signals do travel along the curvature of the earth up to a certain point, but they didn't know that they actually bounce off the ionosphere and back down to Earth. Well, what was interesting, there was Edison and Tesla were working together on electronics and bulbs, and also Tesla was working on a receiver, and he was in Colorado, and he started receiving or hearing these strange dots and dashes, and he thought he was receiving messages from outer space. And he thought maybe Martians or some aliens were sending it to him. So it was kind of interesting, but looking back, it might have been Marconi transmitting and practicing and working on developing his radio system. Anyway, it evolved. People started becoming extremely interested in this wireless radio. And then in 1903, Theodore Roosevelt sent a message by Morse code to King Edward VII. And radio started really taking off. The British started using it on a regular basis on their British ships. And then they said, you know, we need to set up some type of international call system so that we have all these ships coming in from all over the world. Many of them talk different languages, so we need to set up some type of code system or abbreviations that could be used at sea. So in 1906, the International Radio Telegraph Convention occurred in England. And so they discussed about setting up these different codes. And the Germans had a code that they used for distress signals, and it was called SOS. So they decided that we would use SOS, or the British, for a distress signal for their ships. Well, what happened in 1912? Does anybody remember? Something very famous happened. The RMS Titanic had Marconi's radio system on it. And of course we know it hit an iceberg or something and started sinking. Well, the radio operator started sending SOS and the coordinates of latitude and longitude where they're at. He kept sending it over and over and over again. And there was another British ship that was 58 miles away, and their Marconi tape Morse code detector started picking up this message, and it started printing out. So the radio man started looking, he got out his code book, and he says, oh, that's an S. And then he looked and he says, oh, that means O, and then it was S. And then he realized that they were getting a distress signal from the Titanic. It took them 17 minutes to decode what the Titanic was saying using the old Morse paper system. So they headed north, or headed towards where the Titanic was sinking, and they were able to rescue 712 passengers that were on the Titanic. Marconi was given credit for saving those individuals on the Titanic. Had the British had not had that radio system on there and put them on their ships, all those people would have froze to death. Okay, next thing that happens. 1918, and I want to show you this. Let me put this down. In 1918, there was a guy working for General Electric, and he invented the oscillating vacuum tube. And
Louder.
oh, it was oscillating vacuum tube, radio tube. And then in 1919, another company was developed, and it was called the Radio Corporation of America, and they started building radio tubes. Now, what's important about a radio tube? Before, without a radio tube, we cannot transmit any type of music or voice. And so they developed the radio tube to be able to produce or modulate a voice sound. So with the radio tube, in 1920, they started building radios with radio tubes so they could broadcast it and send music. So in 1920, the BBC was developed, which is the British Broadcasting Corporation, and they started transmitting, broadcasting news and music across Britain. Well, people were excited about amateur radio. They were starting to build their own equipment. There was a means of communication, the papers, and so people were starting to study and build their own radios. But but radios were pretty expensive, and people didn't have a lot of money. So there was back in 1894, when Marconi was developing his radio system, a French guy came up with an idea of developing a crystal receiver. And crystal receivers then became very popular because they were easy to build. what I have right here is my grandparents' original crystal radio. And that's what they used to listen. And well, it's a simple little mechanism. It has a coil and a capacitor. It has a wire that goes to a ground, and then another wire that goes up to an antenna. And then you have a little earpiece that you can stick in your ear to listen to sound.
Neil,
What?
keep the mic closer, please.
Are you still hearing me? I'm sorry. Well, they still make crystal radios, and you can buy it and make a little kit. Now, the neat thing about crystal radios is you don't need any electricity. The electricity to produce the sound is produced by the radio wave coming into the antenna. So if we have a disaster where where all communications go down and there's no more internet and there's no more cell phones, you can put together one of these little crystal sets and it'll really bring your family together. You all can sit down at the kitchen table and take turns putting that little earpiece in, and you can all listen to maybe an AM station that is still on the air. And the only problem with that is all the family is gathered around listening to that. One person on your right side will be saying, "What are they saying? What are they saying?" And then the next person on the other side is going to say, "Hey, let me listen, let me listen." So instead of surfing the net, you'll actually be surfing the crystal with a cat's whisker. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in. Anyway, 1920 then, they started broadcasting, and amateur radio operators started to become interested in the possibility of using radio tubes to communicate voice. So in the 1920s, they started developing these real crude microphones. This is one of the early microphones. My father was born in 1923, and he had a cousin who was an amateur radio operator who sent Morse code, and he was so interested that he got into communicating with using the microphone, and so that's where this microphone came from, my father's cousin. Anyway, as it evolved, more and more people got involved with amateur radio, and let me see here. And then in 1914, there was a guy named Percy Maxim, and he was a ham radio operator, and his call sign was Whiskey 1 Alpha Whiskey. And he was so involved with the amateur radio program and knew so many other hams that he thought, well, let's form an organization. So he founded what was known as the ARRL, or American Radio Relay League. And in December 15th, a year after forming the AARL, he decided to put together a magazine so radio operators could share information and about developing new ideas in radio communications. And he produced a magazine called QST. And that magazine is still being produced. Matter of fact, I have the 2020 ones back there, which I've already read through. So if you want to take one home, you're welcome to have it. Anyway, so that developed. Then what happened was, World War I broke out, and after World War I occurred, the United States government said, hey, radio communications is very important. So they formed an organization by the federal government called MARS, Military Amateur Radio, I forgot what the S is. Society? Service, there we go. Anyway, so what they did was they started training private citizens like us on using amateur radio so they could have a pool of radio operators available in case of a major disaster, which really worked out well, because what happened in 1941? We were attacked by Japan. Well, we had a whole vast of radio operators who were trained in learning Morse code and communications. Many of those men then decided to enlist in service and serve as radio operators. My dad did also. And not only was he a radio operator, but they trained him in the new system of detecting aircraft coming in called radar. So he was a radar operator, And he was stationed in the Aleutian Islands during the war because the Japanese were actually trying to do island hopping all the way up into Alaska so they could attack the United States. So my father was stationed in the Aleutian Islands for most of the war. Then a very important battle took place in 1942. It was in June. It was in the South Pacific. Anybody have an idea what that battle was? It was Midway. That's correct. My father said they were sitting in the radio room when that battle was going on. It became so fierce and intense that it used to be that they would code messages so that the Japanese wouldn't know what they were saying and communicating. But it became so involved and there was so much going on that they dropped all the coding of messages directing ships, and they actually listened to the battle that was going on in 1942 from the Aleutian Islands. That's how far those signals were traveling. Anyway, the war ended in 1945. Oh, I'm going to back up just a second. Mars Radio Club produced all these radio operators, but when war broke out in 1941, the Mars program was disbanded, and all amateur radio operators had to either one, disconnect and break down their radio equipment so it couldn't be operated, or they had the choice of selling it to the government for the war effort. Well, then after the war ended, they had all this communication equipment available. So in 1946, they brought back and reinstituted the Mars program, and they started giving all this World War II radio equipment to amateur civilians who were interested in getting involved with the program. My uncle, my dad's brother, was an amateur radio operator, and he joined Mars, and he was able to get a 50-foot walk-up tower. No stairs. I mean, it had stairs, but there was no rails or anything. Went up 50 feet. And when my dad and my uncle were down in the ham shack chit-chatting and discussing radios, my cousin and I would sneak up and we'll climb to the very top of that 50-foot tower and we'd play up there. It's like we didn't fall off of it, but it was a lot of fun. Anyway, we got away with a lot of stuff when our parents weren't around. Okay, I'm almost done. This is how I got interested in amateur radio. In 1961, though, what happened was the first satellite was called Oscar 1 was launched, and it had ham radio capability, so hams could actually communicate through an uplink up to the satellite, and then it had a different frequency which it transmitted called the downlink. We have a total of 140 satellites operational that hams can actually transmit and activate that are out floating in space. But I want to show you one really neat radio station that's in outer space here. I think it's right over there. Everyone see that? You know what that is? That's the International Space Station. And what's interesting about that, I know I'm getting overheated. I see it. That is the International Space Station up here. And this is a geochrome map, and it actually shows where the sun is. And I can explain that later on, or Ernie can go into and explain the importance of day and night there. But a lot of the astronauts are ham radio operators, and what they do is when they're free time, if they have any free time, they'll actually make contacts down to Earth with other amateur radio operators, and you get a real neat card, kind of like what Ernie has up here. He has QSL cards, and he'll explain that in a few minutes. Anyway, I'm almost done. Well, then in 1970s, this is where our radio club comes in. They started putting up what is called repeater systems. And one of the most popular repeater systems is 2 meter. It operates from 144 megahertz to 148. And we have one, our club owns one. And we meet on that, it's operated every night. And it's also used for emergency communications for weather. And Barry's gonna talk about that later on. But anyway, that happened in the 1970s, and we have these repeaters all over the United States, and anybody can log into them, and they have certain ways of activating them. Then in the 1980s and 1990s up to this time, computers came into the world. Before, we had these big, huge radios with big tubes in them. And in the wintertime, it was great because you could really warm up the ham shack because they got really hot. And they were also very interesting because when they glowed, they had this neat glow as they lit up. But they produced a lot of heat. But with computers came along, they started developing the radio smaller and smaller. Ernie has a trans receiver here. And so it's more compact. I have another one that's used for parks on the air. And it is this small. You can either talk on it or send CW or hook up your computer and send data through it. And a lot of young amateur radio operators now are taking these out to state parks and communicating with people all over the United States and the world. My son is very involved with Parks on the Air, and he has a radio a little bit different from that. But on just 5 watts, yesterday he called me. He says, "Hey, I'm in Sacramento. I've got to set up my radio system. Let's see if we can make contact." Well, he was only operating on 5 watts. I turned my beam towards where he was west, and we were chit-chatting using Morse code. It was just amazing, you know. So anyway, amateur radio is exciting. There are so many neat things to do, and you can get so deep into it. You can spend your whole lifetime and really never learn everything about amateur radio. It's a very exciting field. I highly recommend it, and I really recommend it during these times. Things can get very difficult. Rita told me today, or read, that in Australia, the whole internet and cellular phone communication system went out all over Australia. And even the computers were operating the trains there in some places in Australia just stopped working. They don't have any communications right now. So that could happen to us. What I put together here tonight is a display of things that individuals can do. What's over to the right is solar panels. Those solar panels can produce electricity to charge a battery, which is in this box, which can operate any of these radios because they operate between around 13 volts of electricity. So you could always stay in communications if you have the right radio equipment. And it's available. It's just a matter of whether you're willing to spend a little time and study and learn to get your technician's license. Anyway, Ernie, I think I've said enough. You want to fill in now? Ernie Childs was president of the SEMO Radio Club for many years. He's been a radio operator here in the area for many, many buku years. He's taught, he was actually a flight instructor, aviator, pilot. He's done a lot of really cool things, many more cool things than I have. And if you come up here tonight and look, he's got cards from radio operators that he's contacted all over the world. Anyway, Ernie, I've spoken enough. It's your turn. I hope I haven't bored you.
Well, good evening. My name is Ernie Childs. My call sign assigned to me by the FCC is Whiskey Zero, Romeo, Mike, Sierra. And somewhere up here I have one of my, I thought I had, oh well, it's gone. But anyway, W0RMS, you look at that and you say, oh, it says worms. Or, if you're into the radio side, it says root mean square, which has an entirely different meaning. But I have the license plate on my car that says worms, and so I have a lot of people who come up to me and they say, oh, do you fish, or do you raise fishing worms? I had a lot of fun with it, but it was just assigned to me, the luck of the draw, and I've enjoyed using it. But all amateur radio operators have a call sign that is assigned to them by the FCC. Some people say it's the Friendly Communications Commission. Other people who don't like government have other words for it. But anyway, we're all licensed by the government, and we serve at their beck and call, you might say. And one of the principal reasons that we are able to maintain the frequencies and have the use of the radio spectrum is because we do provide the service of, and I have a little button here that says, when all else fails, amateur radio. And typically, you know, you always talk about having a plan A, a plan B, a plan C. Well, we're down past C someplace. Because when everything else fails and quits, then the hams will come to the rescue. And we can, as Neil alluded to, we have capabilities of talking all over the country, all over the world. And some of the cards I have here are from stations literally all over the world, from North Korea to Bahrain to, you know, you name it. And I've been licensed since 1960, and if you do the math, that's been a little more than 10 years. But anyway, I have enjoyed it. It's been a hobby that you can enjoy 7 days a week, 365 days a year. If you become aged and infirm, as all of us will at some time in our lives if we live long enough, it's also a hobby that you can use, you know, as long as you can speak and get to your radio, right? That's a possibility. Now, I'll give you maybe just a little short background about ham radio. Right now, worldwide, there are approximately 750,000 ham radio operators. And there are still countries that have zero ham population, North Korea being one of them for some interesting reason. We have a local radio club here in the county called Southeast Missouri Amateur Radio Club. It was formed about 1956, and we currently have about 60 members. And if you do a search, you'll find that probably county-wide there are around 100 people who hold amateur radio license. So we have and it's quite a diverse group too. You know, you talk about doctors, lawyers, merchants, chiefs, and you know, everybody in between. So it's it cuts across all social, economic strata. And ham radio is like any hobby. You can spend a ton of money on it, and you can spend very little money on it and have a very enjoyable time, whichever way that you choose to go. The Southeast Missouri Amateur Radio Club, as I said, that's our local group. And again, right now, currently, my wife, who is a secretary, tells me we have 60 plus members currently. And we have a number of activities that we engage in. You might call it's the social aspect of it. Neil has kind of referred to the technical aspect of it, and that's certainly there. But the social part of it, we have a meeting every Monday night, not every Monday night, first Monday night of the month at the Jackson Jackson Civic Center, and it starts at 6:30. We also do testing for all of the amateur license, which is currently we have 3 grades. You have technician, which is the entry level. We have general, which as it's kind of implies, it gives you access to more activities. And then we have the extra for those people who just can't get enough of it and want to do some additional studying. We provide testing facilities there at the Civic Center, again, first Monday night of the month. The government, of course, does get into it in that there is some money involved. The ARRL, which is our national association for amateur radio, and they provide the testing services, and they print up the tests and all of this, which, by the way, you can go online and get this. You can get all the right answers to the test. It's given there. Also, another thing Neil talked about was the Morse code. And this, for many, many years, was a detriment to people who wanted to become hams, because you had to learn the Morse code, even for the basic entry level. Well, about 20 years ago, they started eliminating that. And so now there is no requirement for a Morse code demonstration on any of the tests. All you've got to do is go online and start going to one of the sites that provide testing, and just sit there and memorize the answers. So it's not difficult at all to get it. And we've always said that most people certainly can get the entry level, the technician class license if you know, they have body temperature. It's not difficult. And of course, it allows you limited use. One of the uses is to use the repeater system that Neil talked about. And here in Cape Girardeau County, we have 2 repeaters that we operate that are funded. All these repeaters, by the way, are privately funded. Don't get a nickel's worth of money from the government. So this is all privately done. Well, let's see if we can call up one of our local repeaters. Okay, that's the call sign of one of our repeaters. Also note the size of the radio. When I first became an amateur radio operator in 1960, a station to do this would probably weigh 150 pounds. So, you know, we have benefited from the space race, transistorized, integrated circuits, all the things that we take for granted now has come down to this. And to take this one step further, guess how much this little radio costs? Any guesses?
$30.
$88.
The 1995 was close. This is, I hate to say this, but it's built in China. Delivered to your door, depending on whether you buy it from Amazon or, you know, there are different places that sell them, but around $20. And this has got more computing power than the first spaceships that we sent around the moon, for gosh sakes. And the same thing too, this little transceiver over here that covers a different band of frequencies. And that's something that as you get involved with amateur radio, you talk about bands and frequencies, and I won't go into that tonight because it does take a little time to get it, but it's one of those things, it's like, on-the-job training. And once you get in it, you get your toe in it, why you start learning them. And Miss Carla back there, she started on this journey here a few months ago, and she's really coming along and learning all of these different things. Well, let's see, what else am I supposed to talk about? Oh, other things the club does. We have a lunch group that meets every Thursday. This is every Thursday, and we meet at one of the 2 local restaurants that we have decided that all the people like, and one of them is My Daddy's Cheesecake. I'm sure none of you have heard of that, and probably don't enjoy going there either. The other being Burger King across the way here in Jackson. So we alternate between these 2, and it's just a group that gets together 1 o'clock in the afternoon after the lunch rush is over, and then we can sit there and talk about things, and once in a while it's actually amateur radio. So but it's a social group. As most hams are social because we're communicators and we're talking to each other, whether it's across the street or it's across the big pond. Also, English is the language of radio. Now, I won't say that if you're talking to a guy in Russia or you're talking to one in South America, that he's going to be the easiest person to understand. But he will speak English. Now, just in the last 5 years, the digital revolution has really hit amateur radio. And there's a number of different digital modes. And this has really been a boon to people who are in other countries and who want to communicate, because again, it's done in English, And if the operator, say in Germany or France or wherever he lives, if he can find someone who can set up some basic transmissions on his computer, he's good to go. He can talk to anybody in the world in English. And so this has been a real boon to people who want to talk to DX stations or long distance stations. One of our other activities that we have a lot of fun with is fox hunting. How many of you are familiar with fox hunting? Oh, okay. How many? Well, now to put the rest of you at ease, the Conservation Commission doesn't get involved with this, so no government interference from those folks. This is one of our foxes. It's basically, we call them fox hunts, but they're really hidden transmitter hunts. And let's see if we can get this thing to work. We'll turn Mr. Fox on, and we'll turn our radio on and go to the... That's the fox talking to us. So it's broadcasting a signal. And using a radio like this one, we do fox hunts. We do two types. We do fox hunts on foot, and basically we'll set it up and maybe do it like the Cape County Park, and we'll tell everybody, okay, the fox is being hidden somewhere in Cape County Park. On the other hand, we may say, okay, it's going to be somewhere within the city limits of Cape Girardeau. Now, this really has a very practical application, because every once in a while, not only the hams, but police, emergency response, fire, every once in a while you'll find someone who starts interfering with the normal traffic that's on these frequencies, and they have repeaters just like we have repeaters. And we here in the ham community, we had an instance, it's been about 2 years ago, and it wasn't a club member, but it was someone who did use the 2-meter repeaters, and his grandson was over visiting him, and he liked to play with Papa's radio, and especially the microphone. And the microphone that he was using was a desk mic. We don't have an example here, but anyway, it has a feature that you can lock it open so it transmits all the time. And so little grandson played with the microphone, and he locked the transmitter in transmit, and then he and Grandpa went off for the weekend. And this then, of course, this locked up our repeater that you heard. And so we started doing a radio direction finding, and this works just like the old movies you've seen where the Germans are out working and they're trying to find the clandestine radio of the whoever. And anyway, we did the same thing, and we located where this guy's station was. It took us about 45 minutes, but we used our fox hunting techniques in order to track this guy down. We haven't had any instances, fortunately, that it's bothered police and fire and any of the emergency communications people. And we haven't had any more instances where it bothered us. But that is the real purpose of fox hunting. It is to learn direction finding methods and to develop equipment. Someone mentioned, I think Neil mentioned field day. This is another one of our activities. It's an annual. Yes, ma'am. Okay, is that close enough? I'm sorry, got the same problem Neil has. I'm used to using both hands to talk, and one of them has to do this. All right, we do field day once a year, and traditionally this has been an opportunity for ham radio clubs and ham operators to exercise all of their techniques and their capabilities to get out in the field, literally, and set up a radio station using a generator or batteries or whatever power source that you have available, and then going ahead and operating to make contacts with people all over the world with this. And we have traditionally done that, and again, it's a social thing. By the way, I don't think I mentioned hams enjoy eating. You know, it's like so many clubs that you may belong to. If you're going to have food, or especially dessert, you can really attract a crowd. So field day is a combination of exercising for our emergency equipment and emergency communications, and everyone gets together and has a good potluck meal. But again, that's only once a month, or once a year. The fox hunts, we usually do 2 of those a year, so that's 2 more, so that's 3 opportunities. And then we have the Thursday afternoon noon lunch gatherings. The thing that has really helped our emergency capabilities, as Neil was talking about, the Parks on the Air program. And this is the program where individual amateurs will go out to state, federal, local parks, conservation units, whatever. They're all given numbers. And this is all privately done. Government has nothing to do with it, so we can actually have fun with it. But right now there are over 10,000 parks that are on the air. And you start looking at how many parks are in some states, it just blows your mind. It's hundreds, and in some cases, close to 1,000. So, but it has enabled individual amateurs to develop equipment. And this is what Neil was talking about with some of this really small equipment that's in this size, that is low powered, up or down. Oh, high. Oh, well, he's got it chained down. He doesn't want anybody to take it. But this is typical equipment. It operates on the lower power settings, but even the lower powers, Neil was talking about 5 watts. You can talk around the world if the conditions are right. Now, this isn't to say that you can't say, oh, okay, this afternoon with 5 watts, I'm going to talk to someone in Australia. It doesn't work that way. Conditions have to be right. Propagation, as we call it. But still, the capability is there. And all of these guys who are going out and doing parks on the air, they have that capability. So if a disaster does strike in their backyard or somebody else is close by, they've got the capability. Because we've, in our group here in the CMO Amateur Radio Club, we have done exercises with Red Cross, with National Guard, with just about any, the XYZ, ABC, you know, a group of people that you normally think about. And we, just a couple of years ago, we did one with the National Guard, and it was kind of funny in that we talked to their liaison officer, who happened to be a sweet young lady. Her name, believe it or not, was Mud. So Lieutenant Mud said, well, you boys can come over and you can set up, we're at the Armory there in Cape Girardeau, and they said, we don't need you, but you can see how the big boys are going to do this. Well, you know, that just almost always sets you up for an interesting outcome. And so we got there, one of the other guys and I, we have mobile rigs in our cars. It's been a couple of years ago. And we sat up there in front of the Armory building, and we started communicating, and they basically wanted to talk to Jefferson Barracks of the St. Louis area and to Jefferson City. That was the main places. And Lieutenant Mudd had advised me, she said, oh, we not only can do that, but we can talk to every one of our vehicles that's out in the field. And so we got this super golly gee whiz satellite system. Boy, it's great. And so anyway, long story short, they couldn't talk to anybody outside the parking lot. I hate to think what that satellite system cost us as taxpayers. And it wasn't like that they didn't know that this exercise was going to happen. It had been planned months in advance. Come to find out, their satellite dish had fallen over on the roof of the Armory building. But the other operator and I, we carried on and soldiered on, and we were able to make the contacts that needed to be made. And again, when all else fails, amateur radio can get through. And again, all of these amateur stations, they're financed by individuals. Which again, no outlay to the government. But more and more, actually, the federal and state organizations are coming to the realization that we do provide a very important service. One that, well, some of you may or may not know that if we do have a major disaster, the folks who are in charge of it, they have the ability to shut the cell phone system down as far as individual people accessing it. And so they can turn the system off as far as Joe Doe is concerned. And that's why a lot of people are getting involved with amateur radio, and they get a technician license so they can access the repeaters. And even without a repeater, and Barry may talk about this, but he's run some tests just with what we call simplex operation without them. And we can pretty reliably talk to people within about a 25-mile radius, depending on the kind of antenna. Not with something like this. You can't talk 25 miles. But through our repeater system, you could. And our repeater system, as long as we have generator power and batteries, it will stay on the air for a while at least anyway. Let's see, did I mention about the fees for testing for license? I can't remember. Okay. As I said, the government has to get its finger into it somewhere or the other. We have a fee that the ARRL charges for providing all the testing paperwork and processing. If you come to us to do an exam for a technician or a general class license, we at the exam will charge you $15. That's our fee. And that goes to the ARRL to finance the operation, the printing and the mailing and all that kind of stuff. Once you've taken the test and have successfully passed it, then you're going to have to cough up another $35 though to the FCC, and that then they will issue your call sign and your license. Once you get a license, by the way, it's good, it's valid for 10 years. And as long as you keep renewing it, you never have to take the test again. So that part's kind of neat. And it's even, we've had people who have come to us who have allowed their license to expire. As I said, it's good for 10 years, then you have a 2-year grace period. So as long as you renew within that grace period, you still don't have to do anything. But if it is just hopelessly expired, it's been 15 years, 20 years, and we've had people who've come to us and said, well, I was licensed back in 1950, or I was licensed in whenever. And as long as we can prove that they at one time held a license, held a call sign, they only have to take the technician class license in order to have everything restored to them. So everything doesn't fail if you do forget to renew your license. And of course, like everything else, you can do it online now. You can actually, there's some clubs who offer testing online. We haven't gotten to that part. We're still pencil and paper people. Any questions so far? Yes, ma'am.
So we all know that it's going to hit the fan one of these days, probably sooner than later. Do you keep a second radio and transmitter in something like a Faraday cage or anything like that?
I won't show you my Faraday cage. Actually, it's very simple. You get a metal trash can.
Yes.
That's all you need.
Already, I made some examples up here and I tested them out.
Do what?
I made an example. See that aluminum foil box? I went in my wife's closet.
Yeah, what happened? Come on, Neil.
No. You're on.
Is your little green light on?
Yes, I went in my wife's closet, or I guess maybe she gave me permission. I got one of her shoe boxes. And I just wrapped the lid in aluminum foil in the sides, taped it over, And so I said, well, let's see if this works. So I took my cell phone, put it in the side so it wouldn't touch any of the aluminum foil. Actually, I put it in a saran wrap or a little baggie, stuck it in there and tried to call it. It wouldn't work at all. It wouldn't ring, nothing. And there it is up there on the top. So they're real simple to make, and you could, if you have extra radio equipment, or you're not done using your radio equipment, you could just put it in a box like that.
Why?
What?
Why?
Well, if you have like a sunspot activity that would cause electrical magnetic pulse that could damage. See, one of the problems with our new radios, they're so small, they have all those integrated circuits that are made of really small transistors. And if we have like an EMP effect, which could be a nuclear detonation, high altitude, it will fry all the transistors in your radio. That includes your automobile. Your automobile will stop working too.
And your airplanes that
And
are
your
in the air.
airplane, yeah. Matter of fact, my son flies the Airbus 20. 320,
A320.
yeah. And it doesn't have any control cables. It's all by computer and a joystick. And if we have an EMP thing, the plane goes down like that real quick. So, but this is a real simple way of building a Faraday cage. Actually, my wife has these Mylar bags that we use to put our food in for, we've been gardening and whatnot. All you have to do is stick your little telephone in a plastic bag, stick it in the Mylar bag, flip it over with two little paper clips, and your radio or phone is protected. So that's some simple ways to do it. Sorry, Ernie.
Oh, that's excellent. Excellent. Metal trash cans, do it yourself? Yes, sir.
And the other reason is for sunspot activity, like you brought up the Kerrigan effect, which happened in the 1800s and fried all the telegraph lines. So it's a real possibility. Just in time.
Now, the sun isn't necessarily a benign artifact out in space someplace. It can really, solar storms, as they call them, can really be devastating. We haven't had one like that one that this gentleman is talking about for, 150 years. But boy, if we ever do, it is going to be a mess. Yes, sir.
About 15 years ago at Southeast Hospital, we set up a lot of wires. Were you part of that?
I wouldn't want to say anything about that.
But I mean, it was set up on the second floor, and because of we're part of the emergency system of being a hospital. So we would have had you would have had to come there to actually do your work.
That's correct. At one time, hello.
Yes.
I think my battery's dying.
Oh, no.
It's blinking.
Dave?
Is that what that means?
Possibly.
Or you turned it off by accident.
Okay, hello, Tess. Okay, I think I pushed the wrong button.
Okay.
Both hospitals have amateur radio equipment. Our problem has been with the hospitals that they have a turnover in staff. And in the last 5 or 6 years, we have kind of lost track of Southeast as well as St. Francis. The Cross Trails people, they have ham radios that go to all of their outlying facilities there in Advance and Marble Hill and where else is it, Kate. But so the medical community is well aware of this, and Cross Trails has really been proactive in trying to get people who are trained. I've taught several classes for them and gotten some of their nurses and so forth trained. The problem we see with a lot of places, and the same thing has been true with the hospitals, some of the staff have been the operators. And I keep telling them, I said, look, if the whole thing comes apart, your operators are going to be out needing to do medical things. They don't need to be talking on the radio. They need to be saving lives. And anyway, we still don't have the the infrastructure to go into either one of the hospitals and staff those stations. Same thing is true of SEMO. I don't know what their problem is up there, but they just seem diametrically opposed to having any help. And I won't call the lady's name, but who happens to be in their Department of Public Safety up there, but she just doesn't want to even talk to us. So we can only do what people will allow us to do, and we do stand by as a trained pool of operators that we can help. And I'm sure if the push comes to shove and things really come down around our ears, we'll get operators there and we'll have a station set up and we'll be able to pass traffic. But it would sure be a lot easier if we had this set up ahead of time.
The other thing to note is, obviously now, you need to get a license, but in a state of emergency, you can communicate on the system.
Well, interesting that you should bring that up, because evidently out during one of the fires in California, this situation came up and someone did try to operate through a repeater out there, and the FCC brought action against them.
Really? Was it a state of emergency though?
I don't know, it wasn't there. I would consider if my house was burning or my neighborhood about to go up in flames, I would think that was an emergency.
Yeah.
Barry?
Actually, there's a little more to the story. The guy was actually thought he was helping by calling traffic over the, over the,
Yes, you do, please.
Okay, so the guy was calling traffic over it. He was actually interfering with what they were doing. They finally got fed up with him, told him to knock it off, and he didn't do it. And so the FCC fined him, I think, $20,000 because he was actually causing more harm than good. He thought he was trying to help, but they told him to stop. He didn't do it. So they said, you can't do that. In an emergency, they say, if all else fails, the rules don't apply. Well, the rules don't apply until they do apply. So you got to kind of be careful of that. Best course of action would be to go ahead and get a license. If you're going to do that, get a license, do it all legally and everything now. And then the biggest thing you need to do is to use your license. I've trained over 70 people in amateur radio, but even classes. I can count on one hand and have fingers left over the number of people that I hear on the radio these days. I guarantee you probably 50 plus of them, their license has expired, and the rest of them wouldn't know the antenna from the microphone if you showed them, because they just don't do it. I mean, I'm a guitar player. I've been playing the guitar for 50 years. I guarantee you if I lay the guitar down in 20 years, I'm gonna really be bad at it because I've not practiced. And the way you learn how to do this stuff, just like you learn how to do math at school, you learn your alphabet, you learn how to read, you practice because the teacher gave you these assignments at school and you practiced it. That's how you learn algebra, that's how you learn to read and everything. If you get your license and you don't ever use it, you think, okay, if all else fails, I'll use this thing. Chances are your radio's not going to work, your battery's going to be dead, and they won't take a charge even if you can charge them, and you're not going to know what to do, and you're going to kind of hurt yourself really bad like that. So there was a little more to that story, and they do take that seriously, and if you do somehow interfere with official communications, they really come down really hard on you because they take that super seriously. So anyway.
We have another question over here in the corner.
Actually, just more of a statement to touch back on the EMP. For those of you who weren't here when Sam Herndon was here a few months ago, he's an emergency management director, he was here. And I asked him if they were prepared for an EMP if something were to happen along that line. And he said they do not have any emergency plans in place for an EMP. So just to give you all a heads up, if that happens, don't be looking to them to help you.
Yes, ma'am, back in the corner.
Run, Rita,
I have to buy more shoes so he has more boxes.
So
So I know nothing about ham. This is a eye opener for me. So what do I do tomorrow? What do I need? What basic things do I need to do right now to get prepared?
Good question.
Well, yes, very good question. And the first step, as Barry alluded, is to start thinking about getting your amateur license. The easiest way, actually, our SEMO Amateur Radio Club, we have a website, golly gee whiz, and it's actually a pretty decent one. And you can go on there and get some information. You can just Google ARRL, and you open up their website, and it's a national site, so they can tell you. It all depends on how you learn. If you learn visually, if you learn by hearing, some people like to read a book and do well like that. And some people say, no, you show me. I've got to have hands-on as to how this works. But come to one of our meetings, see me after this, and I'll be glad to give you my contact information. And myself or Barry, or actually in the very back there is our club president, Larry Mohandra. Larry, stand up and wave to everyone. But come to one of our meetings there on the first Monday of the month, and we'd be glad to talk to you. And this kind of leads into one of the last things. I'm sort of like Neil. I need to wind this up so Barry can come in and have his turn. But we do what's called Elmering. And an Elmer is a person who is a mentor, who will help you through this seeming maze of terms and equipment and everything. And we're always glad to Elmer people. We also help people establish stations. We have antenna raising parties. You've heard of barn raising parties. Well, we help people install antennas and equipment and to get on the air. And so that's really the best thing. When I decided I wanted to become a ham radio operator, I grew up down at Bloomfield, Missouri. For those of you who know where Bloomfield is. And back then we had a population of about 1,200 and not a ham radio operator in sight. And my dad was always interested in radio, and so he was always encouraging me. But anyway, I finally got to college to going to SEMO, and one day I said, this is time that surely somebody in Cape Girardeau was a ham radio operator. And so I just literally started driving around until I saw something that looked like a ham radio antenna. And I stopped and knocked on the door, and this sweet lady answered, and I made my spiel, and she said, oh, you need to talk to my husband. Well, it turned out he was a captain on the police force here in Cape. His name was Fred Snyder. Some of you may have known Fred. He was on the force over there for many, many years. And he was my first Elmer, and helped me get my, then the entry-level license was a novice license. So that's the way you can get that started. One final thing here, and then I'll open for questions, and then we'll proceed on. I want to mention what's called as a ham fest. And it's not where you go to eat ham, and you probably already guessed. But a ham fest is a big swap meet. And you go to, I'm sure all of you have been to swap meets, it's almost like a big flea market, only it's oriented to pretty much one thing. Ham radio equipment, anything having to do with it. And we have those. St. Louis area has a number of them. Last week I went to one up at Kirkwood, Missouri. Kirkwood has one of the better ones in this area. The next really good one is going to be across the river at Collinsville, Illinois, which is within sight of the arch, so it's not far to Collinsville. And that is probably one of the best ones in this area, and that's I think January the 27th next year. The really big one is in Dayton, Ohio, or Xena, and that is the granddaddy of them all. There will be 40-odd thousand people who will show up for that one over the week that it's in operation. The next biggest one is down at Orlando in Florida. So if you want to take a vacation down there, and I think that one's in February, good excuse. And the third best one is down at Huntsville, Alabama. But these are all major ones. The ones we have around here, in fact, I think there's going to be one in April, and Barry can tell me if I'm wrong, but it's going to be up at Perryville. It'll be right in our backyard. It'll be a first time, so you never know how those are going to turn out, how well advertised it will be, but I'm going to be there. They're always fun. Okay, I'm at the end of my spiel. I hope I haven't bored you too much.
I think we'll let Barry come on up and speak. He's got about, how long? 12 minutes. Talk fast, Barry. And then I'm sure these guys will stay after and answer more questions and tell you about all that stuff my husband drug in here today. And so if you can stay longer afterwards, I'm sure they'll talk to you longer.
Hello, my name's Barry Doyle. Call sign is Alpha Charlie 0 Whiskey Lima. Think Electric Owl, ACOWL. That was given to me by the FCC. So when I upgraded to Amateur Extra, I got an Alpha call sign. So that when I was on those frequencies, they knew I'd already passed the license test. They were quizzing me like, "Are you really an extra?" I could just say, "Yes, I am." Okay. Very briefly, I'm going to try to squeeze this into 12 minutes or less. One of the things I do is a program called Skywarn. Skywarn is a gentleman's agreement between the ARRL and the federal government, namely the National Weather Service. And what they do is they use us amateur radio operators to give what are called ground truth during severe weather. You know, we all talk about the EMPs, nuclear war, big earthquakes. There's a very small chance that's going to happen every year. There's a 100% chance we're going to have a tornado somewhere around here. 100% chance we're going to have severe weather. I worry about that. I have the other thing kind of in the back of my mind, but I know we're going to have severe weather. And I'll give you an example of how this works. Basically, we are out there. I have a group of people that call into one of our repeaters, and I run net control. I have a chat room going with the National Weather Service, and basically they say, "Hey, I already know where everybody is. I know where most people spot from their houses. No, we're not Twister. I don't have this blonde with me in a truck going after this EF5 tornado. My wife is blonde, but she's not crazy enough to do that with me. And I do have a truck, but I'd like to keep it for a while." But basically, we basically give them ground truth. The biggest problem the National Weather Service has here in Cape Girardeau, we're a black hole because we are so far from Paducah, St. Louis, Memphis, and Springfield. We're kind of right in the center of this black hole where the radar really doesn't reach well. Radar, like everything else, you shine your flashlight, what does the light do? It just keeps going, right? Okay, their radar does the same thing. Their radar spins, it makes revolutions, and they speed that up when there's severe weather. Okay, if you notice the radar, like Brian Allworth gets on channel 12, you see it just very slowly turning. It's a mechanical device that they run really slow when there's not severe weather, so they don't wear the thing out. I mean, Paducah went down the bowl gear, which is the main gear that runs that thing, broke. And they had to special order another one. You don't exactly go to Walmart, pick one of those things up, okay? So their radar was down for several weeks during severe weather season, so that was bad. But the radar also tilts. So they'll do a revolution here, 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 and then they'll go back down again. What they're doing is they're trying to get a 3D effect of the storm. The problem is they're about 100 miles away. So basically imagine me standing here, I'm short and squat. I'm not much of a thunderstorm. I'd be more like a rain shower. But say I was 8 feet tall, okay? They can only get me from the waist up because the radar beams, because of the curvature of the earth, it just keeps on going. So they can't get the bottom of the storm. So they can't get 100% look at the storm. So they're kind of depending on guys like me and my spotters to be able to give them, okay, we think this thing is doing this, and then they get a report, yeah, we got baseball-sized hail in Cape County. oh wow, they are, okay, we're gonna throw a severe thunderstorm warning. I had golf ball size hail in, when my spotters had it in Millersville, and I reported that via the chat room, and they threw a severe thunderstorm warning for Cape Girardeau County, and then it went on into, I believe, Union County, Illinois. So they are dependent upon us doing this. We actually had a situation where we had a spotter who was mobile spotting, and he spotted a funnel cloud over Jackson, over the residential area of Jackson. Oh, it wasn't showing up on radar because they're so far away. So I quizzed him really hard. I kind of felt bad afterwards because I really grilled him pretty good, because that's the one thing you don't want to screw up. You know, you screw up a funnel cloud, you kind of lose your credibility. He said, I see a tail sticking out of the sky. Okay, that's good enough for me. I typed it in. I hit enter. Laura Wibbenmeyer, who was on Channel 12's news staff briefly, or recently, interrupted Grant Dayton mid-sentence, and we have a tornado, a funnel cloud sighted in Jackson. And instantly 40,000 people found out about this thing. In Nashville several years ago, there was a situation where there was a rock radio station, and one of the guys who was a DJ in the rock station was also an amateur radio operator. There were tornado watches and stuff all day. And he had his amateur radio in the studio, and he turned up in between songs, and he heard a spotter say there's a tornado on the ground in such and such a place in Nashville. So he took it upon himself. He cut the music and said, amateur radio operator just spotted a tornado on the ground at such and such intersection in Nashville. Well, the general manager called him out on it, called him in the office and chewed him out and said, that's not our job. You don't do that. You're not authorized to do that. Well, a couple weeks later, this guy who was at the Olive Garden, one of the Olive Gardens in Nashville, came in and said, we really appreciate what you guys did, because that thing hit our store. Come to find out, one of the cooks in the kitchen had the rock radio station going while he's cooking all the food and everything. The guy stopped his broadcast and said, hey, this thing is here, which is right by where they were. They were able to get people under tables, get them in the cooler, they got them under some sort of shelter. I don't know if they took a direct hit or if it hit close enough to do some damage to the store, but he said, you saved lives that day, and that's our whole goal with Skywarn, is to save lives. And it's one of those things, because of where we're at in North America, I keep some really strange hours. I'm a vampire, okay? I can wear a cape, 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm up. This is Alpha Charlie, 0 Whiskey Lima. Is there anybody on the frequency? Please call now, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that. In fact, there was about a 2-week period about 4 or 5 years ago where we had like every other or every third day, we had a severe weather event. And it was all at 1 in the morning or something. I work full time, okay? I gotta be at work at 8 o'clock and semi-coherent, so I can do, so I don't crash the server and stuff. I do IT work. So finally, the last one I sent to the National Weather Service, sent them my report. I said, please make it stop. I know this is above your pay grade, but I'm gonna ask anyway, please make it stop, because it's like we were all just dragging. And my boss even said, man, you look like you could use a nap. I said, yeah, I really could right now. And but that's what we do. And that's one of the reasons why we have our licenses, why the federal government allows us to do amateur radio and to consume, if you will, some of the radio spectrum, is because we do offer services. There's numerous instances of people that have had car wrecks, that there was no cell signal, but they could get a hold of a repeater. They would call out for help. We had that actually happen in Illinois. This couple was run off the road and wound up in a muddy farmer's field. Didn't have a cell coverage, but they could hit the 8.5 repeater in Alto Pass, Illinois. They told them what had happened. They had been run off the road by a drunk driver. They called out and said, hey, we need some help. They were able to get some guys there, get a wrecker in there, and get them out and get them the medical attention that they needed. There's lots of stories like that. That's one of the reasons why they allow us to do what we do. I'm a weather nut. I've been a weather nut since I was a little boy. One of the earliest memories I have is in 1969. There was a tornado that hit St. Louis, where I grew up. I grew up in South St. Louis County. I remember waking up and my dad was carrying me down the stairs. So I was like 4 or 5 at the time. And I woke up like, what's going on? Well, my sister was a baby, my younger sister was a baby, my mom had her, And I remember huddling downstairs, because back then they told us you need to be in the southwest corner of your basement, away from all the windows and stuff. So we were huddled up there waiting for this thing to hit our house. Thankfully, it never did. In 1982, we weren't so lucky. We had probably an EF2 go through our backyard, our corner lot yard. It hit our house, did about, in 1982 dollars, about $33,000 worth of damage. Damaged the roof. The garage was smashed. Wish I would have brought pictures. The entire house was a 1902 farmhouse, wooden farmhouse, was moved about this far off the foundation. Where my room was, I was in the northeast corner of the house. It was actually hanging off the edge of the rock foundation. They had to jack the house up and move it over, which was really interesting to watch. Next door neighbor was even less fortunate. It looked like Godzilla came down and just bit the whole second story of his house off. And my friend who was, let's see, I was a freshman in college, he was a sophomore in high school. He went upstairs with a flashlight to see if his room, he was at the second floor, right? He goes up there and he shines the light up and there's nothing there. And all of a sudden he came to enough to realize I'm getting rained on, so they called for help. So, you know, I come by this semi-honestly. My great-grandfather was killed by a tornado near Harville, Missouri. They found him the next day after the storm dead, face down in a ditch full of water. So they don't know if he was dead when he hit the water or if he was knocked out and drowned. They don't know. This is in the late 30s, so, you know, back then they didn't have CSI and all that stuff. But that's my main passion in amateur radio. You know, Ernie, Neil did a good job kind of going through the whole history of it. Ernie did a good job with all of the, what our club does, some of the QSL cards here and things like that. I'm a weather nut with the amateur radio. I do HF. I do talk long distance. I get a few of these cards, not as many as he has. That one really was kind of cool. I had to take that one home with me. But anyway, but I do like the weather stuff. And the way I do this is I stay in practice by using my radio on the weekends and practice my technique and everything. How do you go about making a contact with somebody with the high frequency stuff that I do with the overseas things. Sometimes I can talk to New York. Sometimes I can talk to Indiana. It just depends on what the ionosphere is doing, what band conditions are. So you learn how to work that and you learn how to use it, because if it ever does come down to it, where I have to actually call out long distance for help, I'll kind of understand how this thing is working so I can use it to my advantage. And I don't have to remember what my call sign is, I've just used it. It's one of the reasons why they like to use this, amateur radio operators, is because we do this as a hobby, and if we practice this, when it comes time to actually use it for something really serious, we're ready to go. We know our radio works. We just used it last week for some contest or something. I know my radio works. I know what my call sign is. I know how to use it and all of that. So that's kind of what my piece of the puzzle is with this. The National Weather Service is looking for more people to help them out with this, because basically, like I said, we're in kind of a black hole. They really depend on us to give ground truth of what's really going on the ground. They offer free classes in storm spotting. Usually in the spring, they'll come to Cape Girardeau County. I think the last one, I believe, was at SEMO. There's two levels of that. There's your entry level, and then there's the elite class if you're really interested in meteorology. They get more into the weeds of how this stuff actually works and everything. But that's kind of where my passion is. As far as emergency communications, I am the emergency coordinator for Cape Girardeau and Boulder counties. I'm the assistant district emergency coordinator for District E. The emergency radio is organized by highway patrol districts. So we're District E out of Poplar Bluff, so I'm the assistant coordinator for that. So I think my time is up. So thank you all very much, and I hope you all take this to heart. I would like to see some new radio operators. That'd be really kind of cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have two giveaways, so everybody